Welcome into the Stand Like Men podcast. My name is Daniel Trollenberg.
And I'm Logan Ingram.
And we're here to explore what it means to live out true masculinity. This podcast is about us becoming the men that God wants us to be and encouraging y'all to join us along the way.
We hope that you're enjoying the show. And if you are, don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating. It helps us get our name out there and helps other men join in the conversation like y'all.
So what'd you have for lunch today, Logan?
I had some Greek house. I had a hero meat plate, the Greek salad and basmati rice and some tzatziki sauce. I love that stuff. I don't know what it is, but it is delicious with the hero meat.
Yeah. I think Greek cuisine uses a lot of cucumber.
Yes, it does.
I don't like cucumber at all.
I don't either. My wife loves cucumber, and I really don't at all.
It makes me burp a lot. And then I taste the cucumber all over again.
Yes, I know what that is.
And it's like it doesn't taste good going down. It's even worse the second time around.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't do olives on my salad. Cucumbers, I always forget to ask for them not to be on there because they don't come on salads typically. Mm-hmm. And so I just move them all the way.
I just don't know why someone would want to ruin a good salad with cucumber.
I don't either.
I don't get it.
Nope, no bueno for me.
Yeah. My go-to is the pimento cheeseburger.
I've not had that.
Oh, it's quite good.
You know what blew my mind?
What's that?
Was some of my friends did stuffed jalapenos with pimento cheese.
Ooh.
And bacon.
Yeah.
And like I don't like just pimento cheese just by itself really. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. But those peppers with the bacon and pimento were amazing. I don't know if it was because it was grilled and hot or what
normally it's like cream
good.
Cheese that they put with it.
Yeah.
With poppers or whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Pimento cheese. Interesting.
It was outstanding.
Sounds nice.
And I refused it first until they made me try it. And I was like, oh man. I was missing out.
I don't like the flavor of jalapeno. Like the heat doesn't bother me at all.
You don't like the flavor?
The flavor just doesn't do it for me.
I do. I love it. I eat raw jalapenos all the time.
I'm happy for you, Logan.
Yeah. One thing that we like to do is we core them, split them in half, core them out. Yeah. And then you put cream cheese mixed with ranch dressing powder.
Yeah.
And then just put it in there. You don't grill them or anything. You just eat it. It's almost like taking a pepper and dipping it in ranch dressing or something like that. But it's really, really good. Yeah. That's one of my favorite snacks.
I'll try it every once in a while, and then I'm like, I just don't care for it.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So here's what about cilantro? Are you one of the people? I've heard that either you love cilantro or it tastes like soap.
Yeah. I don't love it, but it doesn't taste like soap. Like I like it.
Yeah.
But it's got to be like mixed in well, and the proportions have to be right. If it's too much cilantro, it's overpowering.
Oh, I could just eat a stem of cilantro.
Oh, really?
No problem. It's delicious.
Oof. All right.
I am definitely not one of the soapy ones.
Yeah, I'm not one. Apparently, they've traced it back to a gene.
Oh, really?
Like actually, part of your DNA is it makes it taste like soap. Yeah. I posted something on social media at one point. I'm like, I just don't. It's unpopular. I just don't know why people freak out about cilantro. I think it's pretty good. And then someone, I would say that a kind individual, but he was not all that kind, was like, no, it's genetic. Like it tastes like soap. They've traced it back to a gene.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you did jalapenos, some cream cheese, the bacon, and cilantro, I'd be really tempted.
Yeah.
To steal some if you just had it at your house.
Okay.
That's a segue into our episode today, Daniel. Wink, wink.
You're so good at these segues. It's unbelievable sometimes. Yeah. So today we're discussing fighting temptation is kind of like the theme or topic for today's episode. And it's at this moment that I realize I don't actually have a good opening question or statement. I guess I've got kind of something. Do you have an opening question that you want to start with?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
Well,
I've got thoughts.
I've got some thoughts. Here, let's start with this thought, that temptation is not sin.
Oh, that's number one on my list.
Great.
Number one.
I feel like it's important to go ahead and get that out of the way.
I agree.
And say, like, just because you're tempted does not mean that you're sinning, because we know that Jesus was tempted. We have a very good account of that. We have a direct account, and then we have some other stories that kind of allude to Jesus being tempted. Yet we know from multiple sources in the New Testament that Jesus was without sin. So being tempted is not sinning. Being
Yeah.
tempted is not wrong. Like, it's natural and normal and expected to be tempted.
Yeah, I grew up thinking that it was.
Yeah.
Like if you're sinning, if you're tempted, then you're not a strong Christian.
Yeah.
Or else you wouldn't be tempted by it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's it either. I don't think it works like that. No, it's not sin, but I also don't think that your level of temptation really has any bearing on your spiritual health, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, a perfect example is Jesus was tempted. What does that mean? Is he spiritually unhealthy because he was tempted by something? No. I can't even imagine that being the case.
Another example of how we know that temptation is not sin. You look at the garden before Eve ate the fruit. We know that there was no sin in the Garden of Eden. The first time mankind sinned was when Eve ate the fruit, and then she gave it to Adam, and Adam ate the fruit. Like, that's when sin entered the world. If that's the point when sin entered the world, then when they were tempted by the serpent, you cannot say that the temptation was sin, because we know that sin didn't begin until the eating of the fruit.
Yep. I just had a verse. I don't know where it went. It's talking about when it becomes sin.
Was it James 1:14 and 15?
Yep. Nailed it.
That was the next verse on my...
Make it happen, because I've just got 15.
Oh, I don't have it pulled up.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll let you read.
James 1:15. Then desire, when it has been conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So desire, temptation, all of that stuff is not the sin. When it is conceived, when it is acted upon, that's when it becomes sin.
Yeah. So what's a good example of that? Like, we've discussed that it's not, that temptation's not the sin, but it does give birth to sin.
Yep.
What's a good, like, real world example of when a temptation becomes a sin?
Well, I mean, just a super gimme example is, so there's somebody that makes me really angry, and I can even imagine hitting them in the mouth. Just the thought of that, just like, you know what, this person really needs that. If I do it, that's a problem. But if I just think it in passing and be like, whatever, that's not going to happen, and just go on about my life without doing it, I don't think there's a sin has happened. But if you do it, then I think that's a sin.
Yeah, that would be a sin.
If you act on it, I mean, that's just kind of a softball gimme on when it becomes a sin.
Yeah. I agree. Punching people in the face would not be right.
Yeah.
James chapter 4, verse 17. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin.
Yeah.
Paul also talks about that kind of in Corinthians when he says, if you believe that something is wrong and you do it, it's sinning.
Yes.
Because based on your heart, based on your conscience, you believe that it's wrong, and yet you're doing it anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, and an easy one there is alcohol.
Yeah.
The Bible is clear that, abuse of alcohol, losing control is the sin, whereas just drinking a drink of wine or something is not necessarily a sin. But if you believe it is, like if you think it's wrong and you do it, then you are sinning.
Yeah.
Well, and
yeah, I think you're exactly right.
yeah. And my dad was talking about, lying at Sunday morning. He preached at church.
Yeah.
And he was talking about being honest and lying and all that stuff. Well, I'm tempted to lie almost every day. Like maybe I made a mistake. Well, the first thought in my mind is generally, well, lie about it and you won't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, if I just did that all the time, then yeah, I'd be sinning.
Yeah.
But I don't. Like I'd push them like, no, that ain't going to happen. What's the point of that? It's either there's no point in lying about that, or that's not going to do anything for me. That's going to get me in worse trouble, whatever. But just automatically, humanly, I'm like, oh, I'm self-preservation here.
Yeah.
I'm going to lie about that.
Yeah. What my temptation to do is to justify it. Like if someone calls me out on something, I know exactly what to say to justify my action so that I can get off. And it's not quote unquote lying, but it's definitely not taking responsibility for my actions or for what happened. Another example of the moment that something turns into temptation. This is a lot more ambiguous, but let's jump into lusting. How about?
Yep.
So oftentimes men struggle with lust.
Yep.
It's normal. It's natural. That does not give us a license to lust because we're told explicitly by God, don't lust.
Yep.
So recognizing that a woman is attractive, not necessarily a sin. Once you start pursuing that, once you get the what they call elevator eyes.
Oh yeah.
And if you don't know what that is, it's when like you see the face and your eyes just kind of go down and back up on said individual like an elevator does. When you get the elevator eyes, when you start focusing on the form or whatever, like when you start focusing on the features of that woman, I would consider that to be a lustful act.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's a sin.
Yeah.
Even though you haven't imagined doing anything with her, you're still lusting after her.
Yeah.
And Jesus is very clear in the Sermon on the Mount that it's the same thing. What you do in your heart is what is just as condemnable as what you do in the flesh, what you do for real. So we've got some examples of the point of which temptation becomes sin. I feel like we've covered that. How do you fight temptation?
First of all, I think here's a point that we've got to make is temptation is not from God.
Mm-hmm.
Like James 1:13, James 1:12 through 13. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, under temptation. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. Mm-hmm. Temptation comes from the flesh. It comes from the devil. Mm-hmm. Does not come from God. So we can't just sit there. I've had people tell me this, and I'm sure a lot of listeners probably have too, is, oh man, God's just put me on trial here. Mm-hmm. You just, I'm giving your strongest warriors the biggest battles, stuff like that. Yeah. It's like, no, that didn't come from God.
No.
Like, that's not it. Like, some of that stuff is just your life choices, or you're doing that to yourself.
Mm-hmm. So what is the difference?
Allowing it in.
Yeah. So what is the difference between a temptation and a trial?
I don't know that there really is a difference exactly. I mean, you can have trials that are outside of temptation. I think every temptation is a trial.
Okay. Yeah.
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 And it's not a test from God, because God's not going to test you to sin.
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe that. Like, because when Jesus was tempted in the desert, God didn't do that.
Yeah, that wasn't from God.
It was Satan. Satan did that.
Yeah.
And there's numerous verses, Matthew, Luke, Mark, all talk about when you are tempted, pray. Mm-hmm. Or pray so that you will not be tempted. Mm-hmm. So there's a perfect example like that. The prayer is with God.
Yeah.
And that's a way to combat it right there. Other ways to fight temptation is, first of all, we have to remove ourselves from circumstances where we can be tempted.
Oh, yeah.
Like if I'm an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, I don't go to a bar.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not what you do.
Stupid. Yeah.
It's really dumb, because of course I will be tempted there. Mm-hmm. And another thing we have to look at is kind of going back to the thing about sinning against yourself, if you think it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, no one can ever say, like a drug addict or dealer couldn't come up to you, Daniel, and say, hey man, I tempted Logan yesterday with some cocaine. Like, that's a lie.
Yeah.
I'm not tempted by cocaine.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just not. Like, that's never crossed my mind to do it. There's no link or desire there at all. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a temptation for me at all. But for a recovering addict, it definitely could be.
Yeah.
And or anything else. Like, I'm trying to have a point. I can't nail it down. And I've said it a million times in other conversations. For some reason, it is.
Temptation looks different for different people.
Yes. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew where you're going.
Okay.
That's a
Thank
good
you.
point.
Thanks for reeling it back in.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Like, what I'm tempted with is not necessarily what someone else is going to be tempted with. Now, there is going to be overlap in my temptation and your temptation, or mine and Kara's, or whoever. But just because I'm tempted with something doesn't necessarily mean that someone else is.
Right.
And there needs to be compassion when I'm dealing with you. When you come and say, hey, I've been really struggling with this temptation, I don't need to say, you idiot, how could you be struggling with that? That's easy. Just don't do it.
Right. Yeah.
Being successful in fighting temptation does not come down to you just not doing it.
Right.
It comes, there has to be more to there has to be more than that. It has to be.
Yeah. Well, there is. I mean, you have to be intentional with it. You have to be proactive. You can't just be responsive, and respond only when the temptation happens. You try to put yourself in position of success and in positions to not be tempted by something. Just like the alcoholism and going to a bar. Like, well, if I am really tempted by pornography and stuff, it's probably not a good idea for me to be alone with a computer.
Yeah.
Or stay in a hotel room by myself when I'm on a business trip. Stuff like that. If I have a temptation to poach trophy deer at night, it's probably a really good idea for me not to be driving around at night with a rifle in my truck. That is not the case, by the way, for listeners that know I'm a hunter.
Seems prudent.
Yeah. I mean, that's just how it works. Like, we don't
set yourself up for success.
Yes.
And it goes back to, like, we talked about this a few weeks ago. You can't just not sin. Like, it doesn't come down to that. Like, you can do it for a while, but eventually the term I heard it as was mortification. Like, your mortification of your flesh, which is a fancy word for you just controlling yourself to not sin, is only going to get you so far.
Right.
At some point, Jesus talks about that, or told that parable of when a demon is cast out, that demon is going to go around for a while, and when it comes back and sees the house is empty, it's going to go get 7 of its buddies, and it's going to be worse for that dude.
Yeah, great example.
And he's talking about sin in that story, where he's saying, like, you can stop lusting after someone. That's fine. Or you can stop lusting altogether. But eventually, you just not doing it is only going to get you so far before that temptation comes back and it hits you hard. And you need to fill that void up with something, and it has to be Jesus.
Yes.
If you're not filling yourself up with Jesus, then you're not going to be able to fight this temptation.
Yeah, got to replace it with bad habits.
Yeah,
like a lot of drug addicts and other I don't know what all else, tobacco, whatever it is. Like, you see, especially guys. I remember growing up, coaches and stuff would dip like crazy. Well, they try to stop dipping. Well, guess what they would put in their mouth? Sunflower seeds. Something that's not harmful.
Yeah.
And that's not sinful, I guess, in their mind.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. You've got to replace. It creates a vacuum.
Yeah.
It really does. It leaves a hole, and we're trying to fill it. It's a God-shaped hole most of the time. When you're tempted by something, it's a coping mechanism of some sort.
Yeah.
I know for me, when I'm really stressed, when I'm scared, that's when I feel tempted the most by whatever it is.
When I get tired, is when
I
notice I struggle the most with temptation when I don't sleep well the night before.
Yep.
When I'm tired.
Mm-hmm. And it's good to know that. Well, it's not good to know, but temptation, if we're trying to withstand it, we're going to suffer a little bit through it.
Yeah.
Like fighting temptation is not easy. It's not like that. Well, I'm not a drug addict, so I'm not tempted by cocaine. Like, that's not a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Is my eyes lingering? Yeah. Is overeating? Is my caffeine addiction? Yeah. It's a struggle, and to lie, and my temptation to lie, it's a struggle. It's a battle in that moment. And it even says that Jesus, when he was tempted, he suffered from it. In Hebrews 2:18, for because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those being tempted. So that's one thing I grew up thinking was, Jesus is perfect. And I didn't quite understand his humanity in the temptation, when he was tempted, and the fact that he was a kid growing up at one point, and he was a young adult. And the Bible talks about him being tempted by all of the things that we are. And it takes some conscious effort and thought to really put that in perspective. And that actually, it's more impactful. Like, it's a real struggle. That's the only thing I know how to say. Is there's suffering and there's struggle involved. Jesus was tempted. He felt the pain of that.
Yeah.
He felt that in his soul the way we do. It'd be like, almost like a need.
Yeah.
Because that's how I feel sometimes with
Yeah.
the temptation. It's like, I need to do this to feel better.
And almost a frustration when you like withstand it. The
Yes.
temptation.
Yes.
Like it would be so easy if I just did this.
Yep.
Self-control is a big factor in resisting temptation.
Yep.
It is a fruit of the Spirit, and that's not a coincidence, and that's not by accident. You're talking about like don't put yourself in a position to be tempted. Another thing you can do to help fight the temptation is train yourself to resist the temptation. Now, that does not mean be tempted by it and resist the temptation. That means train yourself for it. So, for example, like fasting is a good example of this. When you fast, we'll just talk about for food or whatever. Like if I'm fasting, I'm saying no to food for a short time. Now, there's a lot of wonderful and very good benefits to fasting, more than this. But one major benefit of fasting is gaining self-control, where you're telling yourself, I'm not going to eat food. And though I am hungry, I'm not going to eat. I'm going to deprive myself of this thing that is not harmful. It's not bad. I'm going to deprive myself of this so that when I am tempted with the temptation of with whatever sin I'm tempted with, I'm able to say, you know what? I've already told my body no to food. I can tell my body no to this. Mm-hmm. You develop more self-control where you are in control of your body rather than your body in control of you.
Yeah.
Some other things to avoid when you're trying to fight temptation: boredom.
Yeah.
Don't be bored.
Big time.
When I mentioned this before, lack of sleep or exhaustion. A bad diet is a contributing factor to temptation.
Yep.
And then no or little limited physical exercise. Like if we're not, and these are more contributors to diminish our self-control. If I don't have a good diet, it puts my body in a situation where I more likely to run off of impulse.
Yeah.
It's more likely to react rather than respond. It's harder to be intentional about my actions when I am not properly fed, or if I'm not properly exercised. That's not the right word. If I don't sleep well the night before, or more likely, if instead of going to bed, I watch another episode of whatever show, like I know what time I need to go to bed in order to wake up rested and feeling okay. If I don't get that amount of sleep, I'm less likely to be able to fight the temptation. So a lot of it goes back to self-control and putting yourself in a position to where you can have self-control. And that, again, the self-control is a fruit of the Holy Spirit.
Going back to prayer, I think that's the number one spiritual way that we fight. Mm-hmm. Also digging into the word. Mm-hmm. And because you get verses like this, Matthew 4:14 through 16. It gives us hope because, again, Jesus was tempted. So it's not like we're coming to God and saying, God, I'm really struggling with this. And he's like, that's pathetic. Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's coming, he responds with understanding. So, yeah, Hebrews 4:14 through 16. I'm having an issue here. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need. That's coming from a place of love, It's like me when my kid tells me they've been struggling with lust or some sin with lying. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't look at them like, oh man, that's pathetic. Like, you should know better. Mm-hmm. I come with them with compassion. And say, man, buddy, I'm really sorry. I know exactly how that feels. And I hate that you're going through that. And I can't help but feel that that's the way he's going to respond to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times shame is involved in temptation. Like I grew up thinking that, yeah, temptation was the sin. So I couldn't even talk about being tempted because I was ashamed of being tempted.
Yeah.
I carried around shame that I was tempted by anything. I'm like, well, I'm not a good enough Christian. You know, I'm not who God wants me to be. I'm not who my parents want me to be because this thing is tempting me.
Yeah.
And so I kept silent about it. I'm like, I'm not tempted by anything because there's shame tied to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and real quick, I think it's important to discuss the difference between shame and guilt.
Yes.
Guilt is driven by the Holy Spirit, where shame is driven by the enemy. And shame is saying, you worthless, pathetic, awful person who could love you because you do this or because you're tempted to do this. Where guilt is saying, hey, you screwed up. But you are still loved, but you need to go back to God.
Yep.
Where shame is saying, you know, God doesn't love you anymore because you're pathetic. Guilt is saying, God does love you. You need to get yourself right.
Mm-hmm.
There's an there's an expectation of moving forward and moving past this. Shame is just an expectation of you just have to sit here and forever suffer in this.
Yeah. And that's what it feels like.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, that's exactly what it feels like. You think you're all alone. No one understands you. I've brought it up before. You want to watch somebody's soul die. You want to watch the light go out in their eyes. You tell them that they're alone and no one understands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how shame works.
Yeah.
Is it makes you feel alone.
Yeah.
And that no one else understands you. And temptation, you know, can make you feel that way big time. You don't even have to fall into the sin all the time.
Oh, for sure.
Temptation can bring plenty of shame on its own.
Yeah.
And I think we just have to remember that we're not alone in that at all. All humans have suffered through it, but God also did through Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It is the same suffering as us. He understands, and he's not going to condemn us for it.
Yeah. So I don't know if this perfectly matches with this topic or not. I heard another podcast talking about this. This is more of a business podcast. They're saying you're not going to rise to your goals. You're going to fall to your systems. Whereas you may have a goal of, I'm never going to lust again. But if your system is that you're going to open up social media and scroll for 2 to 3 hours a day, or you're going to watch whatever, like if your system is that you're going to put this stimuli in front of your face for multiple hours a day, that system is going, you're going to fall to that system. You're not going to rise to the goal of, I'm not going to, maybe lust isn't the right, let's do a better one. So maybe if for a recovering alcoholic, if their goal is to never drink alcohol again, like that's a wonderful goal. That's good. But if their system is delivering beer to bars, that's not a good system. That's
right.
I don't know if that's an even worse example. Because that's a job profession. It still puts them in a bad position. Do you have a good example for this?
I think social media was fine.
Okay.
Yeah, because you don't even have to be specifically looking for it. Like I know enough about algorithms to know that you can be watching scripture only, listening to sermons only. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Guess what are some of the most popular posts, you know, get the highest rankings? All of that stuff is stuff that are around lust, you know. And guess what they're going to do? What the algorithm's going to do? Mm-hmm. It's going to test you.
Yeah.
I mean, if it knows that you're a male, that's all it needs to know.
Yeah.
You could be watching everything where the algorithm only shows you spiritual stuff. I promise you it'll throw something out there.
Yeah.
Because it knows the likelihood of you clicking.
Yeah. The algorithm is controlled by the enemy.
That's it.
And it is, the programming behind the algorithm is it measures like how long do you stay on that post or that video before you scroll past it.
It's not just a click.
Do you click on it?
Yeah. How long do you dwell?
Do you pause it? Do you like whatever? Like it keeps track of that. But ultimately, like, the algorithm is controlled by the enemy, and it's going to drop videos in your feed that you may not be interested in. But the enemy is not interested in what you're interested in. The enemy is interested in taking you down.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's not just a social media algorithm. It's life.
Yeah.
I mean, the enemy's trying to win us over. He's trying to get us. And so he is operating in that same deal. He's like, oh, that guy's rolling Purdy. I'm going to throw something out there. I know it worked on the last guy. I know it worked on 7 billion other people.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
When I first started, this is a personal example. When I first started taking my temptation for lusting seriously, and I'm like, I've got to get rid of this. And I joined a support group, like an online support group. But I was praying more. I was logging, journaling all of the time, like every day. Anytime I felt tempted, I would journal and log that and be like, all right, I'm struggling right now. Here's what I'm feeling right now. Here's what might be some contributing factors. And I felt like I was doing pretty well. I was, there was one day I was feeling pretty weak. I don't know if I was tired or if I was or low blood sugar or whatever, but like I was feeling weak. I'm like, well, I'm just going to go run to the store or whatever. And so as I'm walking out of the house, this was back when we were in the dorm. There were 2 college students doing a photo shoot for, like, I don't know if it was swimwear or pajama wear or something, literally right in front of my house, because our house had like a nice brick facade and it was outside our yard. So it was just public property. It was just a dorm. But I walk out and there's these 2 girls taking pictures in sleepwear. I'm like, what the crap is happening right now? And like, I'm just like I
that would be shocking.
I've never walked so fast while trying to look like I'm not running away in my life. And like, I got in the car and like I whipped out of there. I'm so thankful nobody was in the parking lot at the time, because I was not paying attention to like anything. I was just staring at the dashboard.
Yeah.
But I'm just like looking around. Like when I get on the road and away, I'm like, holy cow. And like, man, the enemy's working hard on me, because he sees that I'm actually making progress and I'm seeing what life can be like without this temptation. But yeah, like that freaked me out. Where nowhere is safe. Like your life is not safe from the enemy.
Yeah.
The enemy's out to get you.
And what I was saying earlier, about, I was using cocaine as a reference, but he's going to come after you with stuff that you like. Mm-hmm. He doesn't, like, he knows I'm not tempted by celery. Mm-hmm. I'm tempted by chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
Or oatmeal raisin cookie fresh out of the oven. Yeah. Or a ribeye, not tofu.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to come after me on the stuff that I really like.
Mm-hmm.
He knows it. He knows what I like.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, you got to be vigilant.
You've said it a lot. You got to be praying. And it goes back to, you've got to fill your life with Jesus.
Yeah.
And if you're not filling yourself up with Jesus, then you're giving the enemy an opportunity to attack. Yeah. I forget where it says it, but don't give the devil a foothold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and look at it like this. Like we've talked about, these holes in our life, and that's where he attacks us the most. Is he's like, like with lust or pornography use. Okay, what if you're afraid of falling in love, afraid of rejection? Mm-hmm. He's gonna hit you there.
Yeah.
You want companionship, but he's like, well, this person can't reject you. Mm-hmm. Well, shoot, man, sign me up.
Yeah.
Am I gonna be say I just did eat a 32-ounce ribeye. Mm-hmm. Well, ribeye's clearly my temptation. Well, if there's chocolate chip cookie after that, man, I'm full. Mm-hmm. I don't need it anymore. It's a temptation for me usually, mm-hmm. but I don't need it. I'm full.
Yeah.
So the same thing, what you're talking about. If we fill ourselves with spiritual stuff, fill ourselves with God's word, fill our hearts up with that relationship, there's nowhere for it to go. Mm-hmm. You can only fill a water balloon up so much, or whatever, a tank of water. There's nowhere else for it to go. There's no more room for anything else. Mm-hmm. And going back to your example of, the demons will come back and bring a couple of his friends back after you clean out your house, but you don't fill it with anything. Mm-hmm. They'll come back and be like, oh, sweet, look at this place.
Yeah.
Let's get after it again. I'll tell you what, I'm going to invite some folks over.
It's going to get worse.
Yeah. But if you cleaned out your mind and your spiritual life and you just left it empty and left that void, that's where those temptations really start to hammer in. Mm-hmm. And that's where Satan can get a foothold.
Yeah. So one last thing before we end. This past weekend, the youth group, the guys had a movie night. We watched The Fellowship of the Ring, which cinematic masterpiece. It's gorgeous. But in the middle of it, we paused it and like, all right, let's talk about this. Like, because clearly there are a lot of Christian themes in there, and they're intentionally like the Lord of the Rings was written by Tolkien, and he is a Christian, and he intentionally wrote it with Christian themes and allegories and other English terms that I never paid attention in high school English. But it's when you start looking at it and you start like getting past the surface level of this is a great story and start looking at the themes, it's like, oh yeah, this is clearly written from a Christian perspective. Like the One Ring kind of represents temptation and sin. And one thing that we talked about in that, based on like what we see in the movie, and then we had a discussion about it. We're like, listen, that one ring made a promise. It made a promise of power. It made a promise of victory. It made a promise of success and riches and whatever. But there's one little line that it's anytime it like it interacted with one character early on, and he's like, but the ring betrayed him.
Yeah.
And then later it says, and the ring left him. And so what it does, and if you look at it from a temptation and sin perspective, these temptations and sins promise wonderful things. It promises a good time, or helps us, or promises us companionship, or a way to get out of trouble, or whatever, a way to not feel hurt, or a way to get power or riches or whatever. It makes a promise, but then it will inevitably betray us.
Yep.
And that promise will inevitably, first of all, it's lying, but if it does happen to give you some of those, it will leave you.
Yeah.
And it just leaves you in this pit of shame and self-loathing.
Yep.
Sin will betray you. Temptation makes a promise, but sin is going to betray you. Thanks for listening to the Stand Like Men podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave us a comment. We really appreciate it if you would rate our podcast. Also, if you have any questions or comments or topics for another episode, send us an email at standlikemen@gmail.com.
Our verse is 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14.
Be watchful.
Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong.
Let all that you do be done in love.